Greetings. It's June. I haven't been able to get on the trike. I'm all crippled up again. Can't use my hands. Can't use the brakes. Oh God, it's getting old stuff. I'm fighting all this neurological crap. So I thought it's time to tell another story. This story took place in the 1970s, about the mid-1970s, down Olympic National Park, up the Dosewallips River. To get there, you go up Hoods Canal, up to Brennan, and there's a bug after me. Well, it's summer, you know, gotta have bugs. But anyway, backpack trip back up in there. So one of my favorite places, been there 2-3 times now, Thousand Acre Meadows. Now it's about, from the trailhead, it's about 20 miles hike up to Thousand Acre Meadows. Normally I hike and climb alone, but one of the guys I was working with, this 17-year-old kid, he wanted to go along, wanted me to take him backpacking, so I did. And we'll just call him Mark. And it's not a difficult trip back into that country, but it's very long. We went up Dosewallips River, and you got Dose Forks, and you got Camp Miriam and Bear Camp and Dose Meadows, and on up to Haden Pass, where it trail drops over to the Elwha, or you can cut off to the right and go up to Lost Pass, and it'll drop over into the Lost River area. Where I was headed was Thousand Acre Meadows. So we get to Haden Pass, and then we cut back along the slopes of Sentinel Peak and circle on around Mount Wellesley. There's a great big meadow down there. Stop. Anyway, our plan was to cover about 45 miles in 3 days. Like I said, it was a long trip. Trail's not difficult, just steady grind. You know, back then we didn't have all the fancy equipment we had now. Our boots, you know, were made out of leather, and we had to put mink oil or some kind of oil on the boots. They weighed a ton on your feet. It's not like this lightweight stuff we got nowadays. Fortunately, we did have backpacks, the early backpacks with aluminum frames and ripstop nylon. And I never took a tent, but I always took ripstop nylon tarps. We took that with us. The other thing is the camera gear. You know, nowadays there's so much to take and use. And back then I had a 35mm camera. You have to take a light meter with you. The camera itself must have weighed about 2 pounds. And I took a 135 lens, and it must have weighed a good pound. It's heavy. And back then our tripods were made out of wood. I tried not to take that because that's way too heavy. So, you know, besides just the hiking gear that we had back then, you know, you can take some pictures. 35mm. You know, you're looking at 5-6 pounds of camera equipment. I always took about 3 or 4 containers, 36 shots each of Kodachrome. And the trouble is if you took a bunch of pictures, you don't know what you have until after you've had it developed. And a lot of times about a third of my pictures were no good, so you have to throw them away. There was a whole whole different way of backpacking back in those days. Good part is that we left in September, and you have to in that country because that whole upper basin area above the Dosewallips over towards Mount Anderson and Silt Creek, got a lot of snow in there. You got really, I don't recommend it till late August, and Labor Day would be better. So yeah, it was probably right after Labor Day we took this trip for 3 days. Weather was nice. Of course, you got fewer bugs in September. And I've one reason that I travel alone, of course, was to see wildlife. And there's a lot of wildlife in that Dosewallips River drainage. There's a lot of, deer and bear and marmots, and there's cougar back there. I never saw any cougar. I was always disappointed I never saw any elk. It's really, really nice looking elk range, really. But I've always had a gift for getting close to animals. Whether it be dogs, cats, horses, cows, deer, bear. I got really close to mountain goat and other animals. They seem to like me some, a lot more than a lot of people do. I was never really a popular kid, so I was always kind of a loner. Anyway, that's our trip up the Dosewallips here. So I'll start to narrate some of the slides I took, and we'll discuss a little more as we go along. And yes, I did have a very interesting event. First time, and never had it happen since. The Dosewallips River Trail runs through an area similar to this. We've got a lot of Douglas fir, hemlock, some cedar, a lot of salal, but it also has a lot of rhododendrons. And if you're up in that area early in the year, in May and June, you'll be able to see the rhododendrons in bloom. A short distance up the Dosewallips River Trail, and you come to a kind of a crossroads. The main trail, which we will be taking, will go up the main fork of the Dosewallips River. To the left, you can turn off at Dose Forks. You can turn off and go up the west fork of the Dosewallips River, and it'll take you up to Mount Anderson Glacier and Anderson Pass. I believe this is a picture of Camp Merriam. It's located just upstream from Deception Creek. Before you reach this area, there's a trail that takes off up to the right to Damani Ridge and over to Home Lake. It's kind of a scenic area to hike too. I'll do a story about that later. But yeah, this is a typical picture of the campgrounds along the Dosewallips River. You've got Bear Camp, Dose Meadows, and Camp Merriam. There used to be many shelters like this in the Olympic Mountains and plus other areas. These mostly were built in the 1930s by the CC gangs that were hired by the federal government to go out and build trails and build shelters every few miles on the trails. Unfortunately, some of them got burned down, and a lot of them didn't get well maintained, and even more unfortunately, they've removed a lot of these from the national forests, national parks. They've also removed a lot of old mining equipment and other historical artifacts, which I wish they would have left. It's kind of neat to go back 10, 15 miles and see a little bit of human activity that may have historically taken place. Throughout the northern section and kind of on the eastern section of the Olympic National Park, if you're hiking through the park in different areas, you're going to run across these giant granite boulders. Now, granite is not a a typical rock you'd find in the Olympic Mountains. So they claim these great big giant boulders are brought down from Canada during the Ice Age. If you look around, you're going to find quite a few of these around. They're quite interesting to look at, and some of them are rather large. Up above Camp Merriam and somewhere not too far above, I believe, is the trail takes off up to Gray Wolf Pass. But here you start to enter the upper Dungeness River, not Dungeness, but the Dosewallips River drainage. Over Gray Wolf Pass, that'll take you to the Dungeness drainage. But anyway, you'll run into a lot of open areas from avalanches, and you begin to see some views in the upper valley. Right now, in the peak in the background is Mount Claywood, and off to the left is Mount Frome. The valley starts to open up a little bit as you get higher up, and you pretty much once you reach Dose Meadows, you're entering the sub-alpine area. There's quite a few avalanche scars, at least when I hiked back up in there, and some of them were kind of across the trail and made it difficult to get around them. Eventually, during the summer, the park department gets back up in those areas and saw out the logs and stuff across the trail, but you're liable to find them at any time. Once you reach the upper Dosewallips Valley, you start running into a lot of wildlife. One of the first things you're going to notice is you're going to hear the whistling sounds of the marmots in the distance. This is what a Olympic marmot looks like. A little bit different than the ones in the Cascade Mountains. A little browner. I think they're also a little bit maybe smaller. But they keep a good eye on you when you walk by, and but they're sure fun to listen to. Whistling all the time. Here's a mother marmot and her youngster keeping a very close eye on me as I walk by. There are large populations of deer in the Dosewallips River Valley. You can find them anywhere from, even around the main campground at the roadhead all the way up into the snow and into the Alpine. You find them just about anywhere. They seem to just kind of wander from place to place. What is unusual is that the number of trips I've made up that valley, I have never seen an elk. But I have seen an awful lot of deer and some pretty nice bucks up in there too. This 4-point buck, still in velvet, wasn't afraid of me at all. Just busy munching on the wildflowers and whatever they can find to eat there, I guess. But the deer up in that area are pretty tame, and you can actually get pretty close to them. Once you reach the alpine areas, you start running into ptarmigan. Now, this is a ptarmigan with its summer coat on, and in the winter, of course, they turn white. But you'll find ptarmigan, and in some areas, you'll find some grouse. When I visited the Dosewallips River area, of course, this was in the mid-1970s, there were mountain goats in the area of Mount Claywood, I believe. That's where I'd see a goat once in a while, or over towards Lost Pass. The goats were still spreading out throughout the park. I have no idea today if there's still goats in that area. I presume there are, and I don't know how far they've spread around the park. I haven't paid much attention because I haven't lived down there for damn near 40 years. I've always had the ability to get very close to wild animals, and I've been able to get very, very close to mountain goat. This is shot with a 35mm lens, an old camera. There are many black bear throughout the trail system. Mostly above Camp Merriam and up to around Dose Meadows is where we saw most of the bear. At least I saw most of the bear at that time. They seem to like the area around Bear Camp, so I guess that's why it's called Bear Camp. Above Bear Camp, you start to run into some marshy areas, more meadows, but also areas where there's quite a bit of water. And so you'll find places where they probably still do build either bridges or put boardwalks across the marshy areas in the upper valley. As you break out of the forest areas and into the subalpine meadows, just thousands and thousands and thousands of flowers. The air is sweet and the bees and the butterflies are buzzing and a-flying. In the wetter areas, you'll find this flower here. It's called a monkey flower, I believe. Pretty showy little flower. Now that's a lot of wildflowers. The whole upper basin of the Dosewallips River basin, the whole area was covered with flowers like that one year when I was up there. I'd made 3 trips up there. One trip I took somebody along with me. The son of one of the guys I used to work with back in the 70s. I don't know where he's at now, but we'll just call him Mark. Anyway, this is Mark, and we're in the upper reaches of the Dosewallips Valley. We kind of explored the side hills a little bit, but not too much. But this was his first experience at trying to do a 40-mile hike in the Olympic Mountains in 3 days. Here's a picture of the area around Dose Meadows. Now, Dose Meadows is the last main camp on the Dosewallips River. However, there was a camp a little farther up that had room for 2 or 3 tents up on the right-hand side, up underneath Mount Frome up there. But I don't know if that camp is still around or not. It was something somebody kind of just started. But anyway, the trail takes off from Dose Meadows and goes on up to the left to Haden Pass and Thousand Acre Meadows. And there's a short trail to the right that goes up to Lost Pass and the headwaters of the Lost River. But anyway, as a side trip, we went up to the right too. See the headwaters of the Lost River, and actually we went as far as Cameron Pass. But our main trip, of course, main goal was Thousand Acre Meadows, which is off to the left. On this particular trip, it was around Labor Day, and it was still pretty warm out. So we had to stop a lot to get some water. And well, there was a number of times that Mark just took off his shoes and stood in the creek for a while, cool off his feet. Like I said, I don't think he'd ever been on a hike this long before. This is a picture of the Dosewallips drainage. Actually, that's Sentinel Peak over there on the right-hand side, and that's where we spent the night, where I'll have a little story for you. Anyway, we're kind of on the slopes above Dose Meadows towards Lost Pass. Here's a picture of Mark heading up the snowfield up towards Haden Pass. The big mountain right in front of him there is Mount Frome. And the gap in the center of the picture, upper center, is the area goes up into the Lost Pass and over to the Lost River. I found another picture here. It even has a trail sign out there. But anyway, this is just above Dose Meadows Camp. The main trail goes up the valley up the left there. And off to the right is the trail goes up to Lost Pass. Forgot I had this picture. Mark cooling his feet off again. Water, a lot of water up in that area, so you don't have to worry about finding water to drink. Here is where we were crossing the creek back and forth as we worked our way up the valley to Haden Pass. Here we are, pretty close to the summit of Haden Pass. That's Mount Frome there on the left. You can see part of Mount Claywood behind it. The gap in the center off to the right, of course, is the area over to Lost Pass. And I think that dark peak in the distance there is Cameron Peak. I'm not sure. But If we'd gone down over the other side of Haden Pass, we'd gone into the Haden River and down into the Elwha country. But that's not our goal. Our goal is to head over to Thousand Acre Meadows. About a half mile from Haden Pass, you kind of head east a little bit over a ridge, and you get your first view of 1,000 Acre Meadows. The main meadow I don't think is 1,000 acres, probably about 400 or 500, but there are a lot of side meadows and so forth in the area. That there's a lot of meadow up in there. There's two brooks or creeks that kind of meander through the meadows. They're kind of, the Dosewallips River is over the side of the hill, of course, and the meadows are kind of encompassed by Mount Wellesley and Sentinel Peak and another little smaller Sentinel Peak, I think it's called. Out in the part of the meadows, you can see one of the small creeks in the middle of the picture. The dark mountain on the left is Mount Frome. The mountain with the snow on it in the background is Mount Claywood. And we're just probably above Dose Meadows. But anyway, off to the left is Sentinel Peak, and behind us Mount Wellesley, which we went over to Mount Wellesley and explored it a little bit. We explored the backside of Mount Wellesley. Part of the drainage went into the Dosewallips, and the other part went over to Silt Creek. And this is one of the typical high meadows or high basins in the area. We made this trip during the first week of September, around Labor Day, a little after. But already you can start to see some of the fall colors in some of the higher alpine areas. Just beginning to be fall. This is kind of the lower end of the 1,000 Acre Meadows. A mountain there in the back, it's a funny slate rock or something, but it makes it look like it's steel, or kind of a steel color or slate color when the sun hit it. Anyway, that's Sentinel Peak, and up on top of there is where we spent the night. All around Wellesley and Sentinel Peak, and over on the other side by Silt Creek are lots of these little basins full of snow, and they've all got little rivulets of fresh water running out. So yeah, all 3 times I've been in that area, I've never had any problem finding good drinking water. Now, I've drank water in the Olympic Mountains the whole time I backpacked, all through the 1970s. And I never got beaver fever or had trouble with the water, and I never treated it. But of course, back then there were a lot fewer people around. Here's a picture from the slopes of towards the summit of Mount Wellesley. You can see Mount Frome and Claywood down there in the Dosewallips River Valley. Sentinel Peak is off to the far left here. And if you look real close, you can see Mount Olympus and the Bailey Range way over there in the distance. And another picture from Mount Wellesley, looking up into one of the upper basins above 1,000 Acre Meadows. Like I said, the peak off to the right there, that is Sentinel Peak. We'll climb up to the gap there in Sentinel and climb up over to Silt Creek and follow it around, get up on the summit of Sentinel, and that's where we spent the night. Another view of 1,000 Acre Meadows. Besides the small little creeks that run through there, there's all kinds of these little lakes. Lots of flowers. The peaks in the distance, or you're looking across the Dosewallips River over into the peaks in the upper Grey Wolf drainage and Dungeness area. There's Sentinel Peak again with its steel gray color. This picture was actually taken from Haden Pass. So behind me is the Haden River and the Elwha River drainage. I had an old 35mm camera, so I never knew how my pictures would come out until I got it developed using Kodachrome, or Ektachrome. Anyway, I took this picture into the sun. Actually, it came out pretty good. considering I didn't have a light meter and didn't know too much about what I was doing at the time. Well, here's a picture of the view looking across Thousand Acre Meadows at Mount Wellesley over there. We went up the basin to the right and then cut up into the rocks and stuff towards the summit. But we didn't go to the summit. We weren't there to do any mountain climbing. Yeah, this picture was taken about the middle of the Thousand Acre Meadows. Mount Frome on the left, and poking up behind it is Mount Claywood. Some of the snowfields over by Mount Wellesley. You can actually see the one in the middle there used to be a cornice. Almost melted away. I believe there's snow that stays there year round. I've never been in that area where I did find some snow. From the backside of Mount Wellesley, you're in the Silt Creek drainage, and it drains off Mount Anderson, which is what we're looking at here. It's a center of the Olympic Mountains, a very large mountain. Snow covered, and has its own little glaciers over there. I think the little glacier there you're looking at on the middle of it is the Flypaper Glacier. But this is the headwaters of this Silt Creek. Another picture of Sentinel Peak. The route to the summit is off to the left. I wouldn't even try to go up the face of this thing. Well, unless you had an ice axe and crampons. This is the upper headwaters of the creeks that come into Thousand Acre Meadows. As you can see, there's lots of snow. I would not even try to get into this country until mid-August most years. And you're always going to find snow back up in here. Well, here's Mark staring at a little rivulet or creek. I guess he's trying to decide whether he wants to drink out of it or put his feet in it or both. Anyway, there's a good view there again of Mount Frome and Lost Pass to the right, and Mount Claywood there in the background. This is how we accessed the top of Sentinel Peak. That's Mount Wellesley behind him there. The snowfield was steep, but it wasn't dangerous. It wasn't that steep. We did need ice axes. We could literally walk up it. I suppose if it was pretty icy, though, you'd want ice axe for safety, but we didn't take one this time. Mount Frome there to the left, and we're kind of in a upper basin of kind of between Sentinel and Mount Wellesley. A little basin up there with some flowers. We stopped up there and had lunch. A picture of another view of Thousand Acre Meadows. This time we're on the slopes of Sentinel Peak. You can see that off to the right, top right, you can see the top of Mount Wellesley sticking out. Off to the left, of course, is the Dosewallips River Valley. Here's a picture of the upper end of Thousand Acre Meadows. You can just see Mount Frome to the right. Peak off to the left is Sentinel Peak, and way in the distance, there it is, Mount Olympus. You know, I'm not sure where I took this picture from. I think that's Mount Sentinel off to the left there. That's definitely Mount Claywood way in the background. Don't really get a good view of Mount Claywood from the Dosewallips side. Well, here we are up on almost at the summit of Sentinel Peak. Sun's starting to set, of course. We're trying to figure out where we want to sleep. Try to find a flat spot up there someplace. It's Silt Creek off to the right, and down the middle of the picture kind of is the Dosewallips area, and I believe that rocky peak in the distance is Mount Constance. When you're up on top of Sentinel Peak and in that area, the only water now is melting snow. Well, here's where we decided to camp for the night. Well, the good thing about it, we had excellent views, nice sunny weather, Spectacular views of Mount Anderson. They're on the other side of Mark. And the whole area down below there, the Silt Creek. We got all the views over to the Dosewallips, views of Mount Olympus. Just a slight breeze. There was no bugs. That's something I don't like to do, is camp where there's bugs. So I normally never camped in the designated camping areas. I never got a permit either. Always bushwhacked, had bivvy camps up high, tried to stay away from the bugs, stay closer to the better water. And I usually went by myself, and I just wanted to be with the animals. But this trip I made with Mark, I think this is about the third trip. I think I made about 3 trips to this area when I lived down in Washington State. Anyway, it's a pretty spectacular place to camp, isn't it? Beautiful views. Here's the view down the Silt Creek again, and down the Dosewallips River. Mount Constance off to the left. Man, look at all that snow. We got plenty of water to drink. We just got to melt it. Yep, home sweet home. Headwaters of Silt Creek. Well, I never took a tent with me usually. Very rarely. I owned one, but didn't want to take it. Always took that ripstop nylon tarp, lightweight. And of course we had little foam pads and slept on those, and slept a little bit on our backpacks and whatever we can find. But there you are. There's cozy camp on top of the ridge there, Sentinel Peak. Not quite at the summit, but pretty close. Yeah, we got a picture here of sunset. We got Mount Claywood and Foam to the right, and we got some peaks off the left here towards Silt Creek, and in the distance is the sun going behind Mount Olympus. You can see its multiple summits up there. Little pointy points. And another view from where we were planning to sleep on top of Mount Sentinel up there. Looking across the Dosewallips River, over across Lost Pass, and the headwaters over there of Lost River. You can still see Mount Claywood with the snow on it to the left. As you can tell, there's lots of snow left, and this is, like I said, this is the end of summer. So there's snow up there, I think, the year round. Yeah, it's got a really nice little camp sitting on top of Mount Wellesley up there. In our down bags, getting all nice and comfortable, watching the stars. Yeah, very impressive. Really nice night. Then something strange happened. It was about midnight, I think it was. It was dark. But all of a sudden there was a giant blast of wind. And it wasn't a gentle increasing wind. It was a huge blast. Hurricane force wind, it felt like. 40, 50, 60 mile an hour blast of warm air, warm wind coming right at us, hitting us. And it didn't stop. It just kept blowing. And our stuff is getting all blowed all over the place. And we're trying to collect it all. And there was no place for us to go. And so we got into our, got down our sleeping bag and laid on our backpacks and got all our gear and stuck gear inside our sleeping bag. And it is just howling. The wind is just blasting us. And we're actually afraid we're going to get blown off those rocks off that mountain. And we're inside the sleeping bags, and what we ended up doing is putting our arms around the biggest rock we could lay next to, just to hold us in the wind. And this went on for about an hour or two. It's quite a wind, and it was coming out of came out of the kind of the southeast area. It wasn't a westerly coming off the ocean. I don't know where that wind came from. It was a warm wind, so you knew it was coming off the land. But I have never seen wind hit that fast and that furious. And we're getting a little concerned, you know, not only losing stuff blown over the side of the hill we have to go get later, but I mean, just to hang on ourselves, you know, laying there asleep, hugging a big rock. Craziest thing. Never had anything like that since. But yeah, that was quite an experience, and oh man, my leg hurts. But anyway, I've never talked to anybody else that experienced something like that before. If you ever have, got to put it in the comments. I'd like to know what it was and how it hit so hard and fast and just kept blowing. And the sky stayed the same, was clear. I mean, there are no clouds. So anyway, it's, you know, after about an hour or so, I think, maybe a little longer, could have been almost 2 hours, because who keeps track of time and something like that, it just stopped about as quickly as it started. Really a strange event. But I highly recommend the Dosewallips Trail. You know, you got good camps, you got good water. Back then in September, because you don't have the people or the campers or the hikers you have now. Mark and I took that trip. It was about 45 miles, all total. You know how many people we saw in 3 days? One guy. And he was having a bad experience around Camp Merriam and Bear Camp. He had some black bears that were bugging him. We didn't have that problem. We saw the bears, but he got a little nervous a few times, he said. Especially with some of the sows and the cubs close by. The only person we saw on the whole trip. So I highly recommend that area for hiking. It's always been a good place to get away. You're kind of in the middle of the Olympic National Park. Extremely beautiful around Mount Anderson. You know, I'd like to have spent more time going out around the headwaters of Silt Creek. If I had more time, I think we would have done that. Maybe even gone over Flypaper Pass and drop into Mount Anderson Glacier there, and then from there you drop down to Anderson Pass and come back out the other forks of the Dosewallips down at Dos Forks. But yeah, I highly recommend that trip. Anybody you want to get away and see some wildlife and not be bothered, that's a good hike to take. Rough on my poor hands. I hope you enjoyed that little bit of a story there. Kind of disappointed I've not been able to get out much here in the last few days because of the weather and the physical pain I'm having, but you know, I've got other videos on there for you to watch, and stories, and riding on trikes and so forth. I've ordered a little 360 camera I'm going to take with me here. I'll have it in a couple of weeks. It ought to make a few different type of videos. But, you know, thanks for watching my stuff, and, you know, I'm just an old guy running around on a trike and in the woods, and, you know, not that entertaining that much, but, you know, thanks for watching my videos, and these videos are for, well, all the people to watch someday when I'm gone. So, I'll catch you later, and we'll try to get a video up again in about 3 days. Till then, see you later.